All right. It's recording. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlotte. Charlotte, would you like to continue and talk a little bit about our agency and community engagement, as well as the upcoming public meeting that we're planning for?
Sure. As everyone can see from this slide, we do have the Community Advisory Committee, and we really appreciate their help guiding us through this project study. We also have been having meetings, of course, as tonight with our ANCs and other stakeholder meetings, of course, that have included civic groups and other organizations like the Main Streets as well. We also have an interagency group that we meet with, which includes WMATA, DOE, and other stakeholders along the corridor that are other agencies we have to coordinate with as well. Next slide, please. Yep. And this slide is a sample of the meetings that we've had. And I also wanted to highlight that, to Ed's point, we will be having the first public meeting on March the 30th and April the 1st. The March the 30th meeting will be a daytime meeting. We want to make sure the businesses also are able to attend that meeting. So that meeting will start at 9:30 a.m. And then we also will have an evening meeting that will be on April the 1st. So, you know, we're trying to make sure that we accommodate everyone who needs to be present as well. And we will be sending out information on those meetings and hope that you all can help us get the word out to the community to be a part of those meetings as well.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'll continue with a little bit of background. One of the reasons for the study is looking at the reversible lane signage and the reversible lanes itself. A lot of folks have told us that the lane signage is difficult for motors, the visibility to see the signs in the corridor. So you can see on the right, you can see the reversible lane signs covered up during this pandemic period. In terms of the roadway geometry, the Connecticut Avenue is 110 to 140 feet, the right-of-way. The curb-to-curb width for Connecticut Avenue is 60 feet, and that consists of 6 travel lanes. In the morning, we have 4 lanes going inbound, and this is pre-COVID, and 2 lanes going outbound, and the reverse occurs during the evening rush hour, where you have 4 lanes going outbound and 2 lanes going inbound. We have a couple of slides on safety. We have about 1,500 police reported crashes during the 5-year period, starting with 2015 through 2019. About 300 per year. And we have about, although the reversible lanes are in effect 15% of the time, approximately 44% of the crashes occurred during the reversible lane operations. And as you can see on the right, we actually looked at other corridors, and Connecticut Avenue is kind of in the middle in terms of the average annual crash rates per million vehicle miles. You can see Mass Avenue is pretty low at 4 here, and Georgia Avenue is much higher at 16. And so Connecticut Avenue is right in the middle of that graph here. In terms of average daily traffic volumes, we have 30 to 32,000 vehicles per day on Connecticut Avenue in the northern section, and we have around 24,000 vehicles per day on the southern section. I should let everybody know that we did a pandemic traffic count in December, and we found that the traffic is approximately 50% of what it was during pre-COVID conditions on the avenue. This slide shows you the origins and destinations of vehicles traveling on Connecticut Avenue at selected locations. So north of Military, we have the middle section, Van Ness to Upton, and then we have south of Calvert. And I think the conclusion of this slide is that about 40 to 50% of the traffic on Connecticut Avenue today is through traffic. And what we mean by through traffic, that's traffic that has neither origin nor destination within our study area. And as you can see, the study area on the map is kind of outlined in the pink. The primary study is outlined in the pink shading. me just stay for a moment so you can look at these statistics. So 40 to 50% of the traffic on Connecticut Avenue through traffic. And I think that corroborates your everyone's perceptions about the types of traffic that we've been told, at least during our public meetings. Cynthia's going to talk a little bit about alternatives development right now, and then I'll follow it up afterwards with our evaluation. Cynthia?
Thanks, Ed. So this shows some of the guiding principles that we've developed as part of this project, both as as an additive to the project goals, but also as a way to help evaluate some of these alternatives moving forward. So things, principles such as quality of life, so accommodating people who live, work, and play along the corridor, especially corridor residents and businesses, really understanding the implications of safety and Vision Zero, so reducing the number of crashes and fatalities along the corridor, realizing traffic operation mitigation, so mitigating significant impacts to traffic along the corridor as well, retaining some level of parking and loading for businesses and commercial areas, and making this a multimodal corridor that supports safe access and traveling for pedestrians, bicyclists, transit users, and motorists as well. For the scope of this study, we are really looking at the 60-foot curb-to-curb cross-section, so really staying within that boundary for any alternatives that we're moving forward with. Next slide, please. So we at DDOT started with 5 concepts, so we're calling them 4 build concepts, A, B, C, and D, O, and then a no build concept. Over the last couple weeks and months, we've been talking more with the public in our community advisory committee, and some suggestions for additional alternatives have been added. So we'll go through D1, D2, and concept E as well. One thing to note is that the concepts for no build, A and DO, would require MUTCD compliant overhead signals. So upgrading everything to be uniform in terms of traffic conditions and design. And we did meet with the CFA, and they were not supportive of any overhead signage. In terms of concepts, all concepts will be carried forward to our public meeting this March and April, regardless of which ones we did more specific traffic analysis for, which were the no build, concept B and C. However, all alternatives will include elements to improve safety and mobility, and we'll kind of go through those appended elements toward the end. Next slide, please.
And I'll just add the last bullet that we are looking at a speed limit reduction along Connecticut Avenue, a posted speed limit, right, from 30 miles to 25 miles per hour. So we're not finished our analysis yet, but we'll let folks know in the weeks to come.
So our first alternative that we'll go through is the no build management option. So this will be modeled as our base concept. So it's similar traffic operations to pre-COVID conditions where the 2-lane reversible lane system is being retained. There would be no upgrades to overhead signals and signage. During the peak hour, it would be 4 lanes inbound in the AM and 2 lanes outbound in the AM, and then the reverse in the PM. During the off-peak periods, there are 2 travel lanes in each direction with parking on both the east and west sides of Connecticut Avenue. This alternative could include opportunities for enhancing pedestrian safety and accessibility. The no build option does provide a baseline to measure the impacts of concepts moving forward. And this is just a quick high-level sketch of cross-sections for what this looks like. On the right, the 2 cross-sections show an AM and PM peak condition where we're showing 4 lanes in the peak hour direction and then 2 lanes in the non-peak hour direction. And then on the off-peak period, the left cross-section shows 2 lanes in each direction with parking on both sides. All right, so concept A retains the 2-lane reversible lane system. This would require an upgrade of overhead signage and signals. During the peak hour, there would be 3 travel lanes in the peak direction. However, there would only be 1 off-peak direction travel lane. So in the AM, it'd be 3 travel lanes southbound and only 1 going northbound. During the off-peak period, there are 2 lanes in each direction as well, but no parking. This does provide a one-way protected bike lane on both sides of the road that are 5 feet with a 4-foot buffer. And like I stated before, all the parking for this concept would need to be removed along the corridor itself. Next slide. Concept B removes the reversible lane entirely as well. This concept provides a peak hour lane operation with 3 lanes northbound and 3 lanes southbound.
Hello, this is Kyle. I have a question.
Sure.
Hey,
How many bananas can you fit up your ass?
Show me that fat.
Okay. I'm going to continue.
yeah, let's we're not going to take questions until the end.
Okay.
Hey, Cynthia, so just keep going.
All right. So concept B removes the reversible lane, 3 lanes northbound, 3 lanes southbound during the peak direction. During the off-peak period, there would be 2 northbound and 2 southbound lanes. Parking would be provided on the east and west sides of Connecticut Avenue. This concept does not provide any protected bike lane facilities. And as part of this as well, no parking would be removed as part of this concept. So parking would be allowed during the off-peak periods, similar to pre-COVID conditions, but not during the peak hour. Next slide. So this is showing the typical layout for concept B. The bottom shows
Fucking pussy. I didn't know it.
with
Fucking
3
know it. I
lanes in
just
each
didn't know it.
direction.
Like, oh.
And the top shows the off-peak condition with 2 lanes in each direction with parking on both sides. Concept C removes the reversible lane system entirely as well. During the peak hour and off-peak periods, it'd be the same typical operations of 2 northbound and 2 southbound travel lanes. This does provide a one-way protected bike lane on both sides of the road, consistently with a 5-foot bike lane with a 4-foot buffer. This does accommodate the need for some left turn and parking lanes along the corridor as needed. In terms of traffic operations, it's pretty manageable impacts based on our analysis. However, overall, parking would need to be removed along portions of the corridor outside of the commercial zones. Within the commercial study area or the commercial areas, there'd be around 120 spaces where parking would be accommodated on one side of the street. Next slide. So this is showing cross sections of a typical layout for concept C. On the left, it's pretty consistent with 2 travel lanes in each direction with a buffered bike lane. And then as we move toward an intersection where we may need a left turn pocket, the buffered bike lane is skinnied up a little bit and some width from the travel lanes is managed toward the center left turn lane. And then as we move toward commercial areas such as the cross section on the right shows what that would look like. So accommodating parking on, in this case, the north side or the east side, and managing and keeping with 2 travel lanes in each direction and a buffered bike lane. Next slide. This is just showing a rendering of what that would look like. So the image on the left is showing a bus floating island, or in this case, a ZICLA, which is a type of facility where bicyclists and buses would help to reduce the number of conflicts between the two, where the buses would stop in lane and passengers would board and alight onto the ZICLA, and then cyclists would, the bike lane itself would be skinnied up, and bicyclists would need to yield to people getting off the bus. So the image on the right is just showing another cross section of where we're showing Porter and Connecticut, where there would be a left turn pocket as well, and no parking on this section. This is just showing a more detailed look at what parking would look like in the commercial areas. This is showing it on the east side. where some of the width would be shifted from the bike lane and the buffer in the travel lane to the parking. One thing to note is that for the most part, I think we have accommodated parking in this concept to be on the east side of Connecticut, but there are some locations especially near the zoo where the parking is on the west side. Next slide.
And I didn't hear if you said this, Cynthia, but 24/7 parking, it would be all day parking.
Yes, and for the concept C, it would be parking all day for the commercial areas. Concept DO is where we are showing a two-way protected cycle track on the west side of Connecticut Avenue. This would retain one reversible lane and would require upgrades to signals and signage. During the peak hour operation, it'd be 3 peak travel lanes in the peak direction with 2 off-peak direction travel lanes. During the off-peak period, it'd be 2 northbound and 2 southbound travel lanes with the opportunity to have parking and loading on the northbound side. As part of our bicycle design, facility design guidelines, because there is a cycle track on the west side of Connecticut Avenue, we do need to provide safe passing for both vehicles taking lefts and then also for the cycle track operations itself. And so normally we would need a left turn pocket with a protected phasing. However, this would not be constructible in this specific alternative because of the reversible lane. So that's definitely a flaw within this concept. And other things are just in terms of pedestrian and cyclists, there may be some initial conflicts just because pedestrians aren't used to looking for cyclists in both directions. So that's something to know. Next slide. Concept D1 is very similar with the protected cycle track on the west side. This does retain the reversible lane system with traffic operations all day being 2 lanes northbound and 2 lanes southbound. Sorry, this should say removes the reversible lane system, not retains. The 2 other options that would be added to this would be a northbound parking / loading lane or northbound southbound left turn pocket. Similar to the other concept in DO, left turn pockets would be needed to protect for protected only phasing at all intersections. And due to that specific guideline, the default cross section would be more of the right cross section where we're showing we would need 2 travel lanes in locations where we would need a left turn pocket. So parking might need to be reduced a little bit for this one. Next slide. Concept D2 removes the reversible lane entirely. This one shows 2 northbound and 2 southbound travel lanes with a 2-way center left turn lane during the peak period. And then during the off-peak period, there'd only be 1 northbound travel lane and 2 southbound travel lanes. So in this situation as well, there would be a 2-way center left turn lane and northbound parking and loading lane with a 2-way protected cycle track. Next slide. And then the last concept we'll go over is concept E. This kind of blends a lot of the options or the alternatives from before where we're removing the reversible lane entirely. However, during the both peak period and off-peak period conditions, there would be 2 northbound and 2 southbound travel lanes, as well as parking and loading full-time on both sides of the street. This would also include a 2-way protected cycle track on the western side of Connecticut. However, one of the major flaws of this concept is that it does go outside of our 60-foot right-of-way and would require 67 feet, which doesn't conform to our guiding principles of the project and is a fatal flaw as well. Because this project does overlap with the Cleveland Park Streetscape project, there are some design impacts where we aren't able to touch construction that has been done as part of that project as well. Next slide. This slide is just showing recent and ongoing improvements in the area as part of both the Cleveland Park streetscape design and drainage project, as well as signal timing upgrades. So things such as extending crossing times, leading pedestrian intervals. These are just elements that we'll be incorporating as part of our project as we move closer toward design. Next slide. And then these are some elements that we've identified as safety and mobility additions that can be added to both the no-build concept as well as specific concepts that might require more multimodal elements, such as like hawk signals, potential for curb extensions, no turn on left restrictions, et cetera. So we'll be looking at these elements more closely in our design when we move toward 10% design. And then as we wrapped up our analysis of the fatal flaws and pros and cons of each concept, some of the things that we're finding are that generally it's difficult for one concept to meet the full purpose and need. There are a number of concepts that do touch upon a number of safety benefits and adding bike lanes, et cetera. However, there are trade-offs that we are working with both the community and DDOT folks interagency-wise to make sure that we're addressing and kind of balancing the trade-offs between all different modes and users. We are moving forward with a no-build management option, and although it doesn't meet the purpose and need, and it does retain the reversible lane system, it does require us to use that as a baseline to understand the impacts of other alternatives that we'd be evaluating. All right, Ned, back to you.
Thanks, Cynthia. Appreciate it. I'm going to talk a little bit about our evaluation of some of these alternatives. We did develop an evaluation matrix, and we did some scoring from a +2 to a -2, desirable to a not desirable scale. And the criteria that we looked at was pretty comprehensive. We looked at safety and operations, pedestrian, bicycle, and transit opportunities, accessibility and comfort, parking, loading, and pickup and drop off, and then the constructability and the ability to implement an alternative. And embedded in all of the evaluation criteria is looking at the consistency with the District of Columbia plans, Move DC, our bicycle master plan, Vision Zero, our sustainable DC 2.0 plan, carbon neutrality goals, and the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Amendment Act of 2016. So these plans are really embedded in the criteria that we looked at. And we have a chart here. And you can see the screen one was the fatal flaw analysis. Basically, concept E was outside of the curb to curb width. So we're not going to look at that anymore. In terms of screen two, you can see the evaluation criteria in the column from traffic safety down to constructability and implementation. And then we graded to the best of our ability. We graded each of the concepts on against each of the evaluation criteria. And I think, as you can see, there's lots of negatives. The no build, concept A, concept D0, D1, and D2 are kind of in the negative category. And then concepts B and C kind of rose to the top in terms of, and they appear about equal in terms in the plus column. So I think these two concepts are rising to the top, and that's where we spent most of our effort looking at the impacts of these alternatives. The other alternatives appear to have constraints, major constraints, either traffic operational constraints or modal constraints or implementation constraints that we thought just would be too great to sustain. In terms of alternative B, if we remove the reversible lanes, we believe we can reduce crashes overall by approximately 17%. And you'll see the same number in concept C. So reversible lanes, removing that confusion, we believe a 17% reduction. We'll also get potential safety benefits from left turn calming treatments in alternative B. And in alternative C, you can see the addition of protected bicycle lanes. What would happen there is traffic would slow generally. And so any crashes that would occur, the crashes would be less severe. So less severe crashes and potentially less a reduction in fatalities. Adding turn lanes, other options for concept C that we're looking at that would also have a positive safety benefit. That includes adding turn lanes. We said about 27% reduction in crashes, parking removals, and that would be at the intersections where there may be visibility problems. So if you eliminate 1 or 2 spaces, you will get a reduction in crashes because of your increasing that visibility. And if we decide to put a pedestrian refuge island in, we believe that could help us out again with about 26% reduction of crashes at intersections with refuge islands. So it just gives you a range of possibilities. In terms of parking, the total number of parking spaces in the corridor from Legation Street to Calvert Street is approximately 600. And we have approximately 24 loading spaces in the corridor. In concept B, we take 0 spaces. There would be no parking spaces removed. In concept C, there would be approximately 500 spaces removed. But as Cynthia said, about 120 spaces we would essentially gain during the peak period, during the peak periods in the corridor, and then those spaces would remain all day long. In terms of traffic analysis, we focused on concept B and C. Why? The no build provides no changes in the pre-COVID configuration. 4 lanes southbound and 2 lanes northbound in the morning and the reverse in the evening. Concept B reduces the peak hour, peak direction lanes by 1. And concept C reduces the peak hour, peak direction lanes by 2. We prepared a 2045 traffic volume forecast. That's our horizon year, and that's consistent with the cooperative forecast for the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and it's consistent with the land use, employment, and population estimates for DC and the region. We've looked at potential traffic diversions. We conducted capacity analysis, and we did look at the relative travel time differences between each of the concepts. So the study does not, and the model does not account for changes in traffic volumes on a year-to-year basis, like we're experiencing during the pandemic conditions. And I think what Michael Glickman will show in the capacity analysis is that the numbers we show are for the peak hours of the day. Other hours of the day would be much less. That would be conservative. And the model also has limitations in terms of modal change. So if we get to have a capacity issue on a road, people will decide to change modes, but the model itself doesn't allow us to look at that. So the numbers that you see, I would view as conservative. Let's give you a couple of examples of existing and forecast AADTs, and that's average annual daily traffics, or ADT, your 24-hour traffic volume. So as we said early in the presentation, there's around 24 to 32,000 vehicles per day on Connecticut Avenue. In the no build condition, 25 years from now, the model estimates that we would increase our traffic volumes. For example, let's just look at Albemarle Street to Porter Street. We'd go from about 32,000 to about 34,500 in the no build condition. That's if nothing was done. In 2045 build concept B, where we're just providing three traffic lanes in each direction, no bike lanes, we would reduce our traffic on Connecticut Avenue by approximately 2,000 or so to about 32,500. And in concept C, we would further reduce that number to approximately 28,000. And that these reductions, either in B or C, are due to the diversion of trips in the corridor. This slide just gives you an order of magnitude idea of the existing traffic volumes and forecasts. And so it's not all apples to apples, but it gives you a sense of what the different modes are having in terms of their volume. So for example, today, as we said, 24 to 32,000 cars per day in vehicles. If we went to concept B, that would be 24 to 32,000, and concept C, 19,000 to about 30,000, depending upon where you are on the corridor. In terms of buses today, we have approximately 4,300 patrons per day on the L1 and the L2 routes in the corridor. In terms of metro, we have 3 metro stations along the corridor, and it ranges, the entries range from about 3,700 to 6,000 persons per day entering those stations. And as you can see, bicycle, the last mode that we're looking at, has around 30 to 90 bicycles per day. If we forecast the AM and the PM peak hours for bicycle with a protected bicycle lane, if you add the AM and PM together, it's about 1,000 bikers in the morning and the afternoon. And then in a daily basis, it would be around 3,100 to 3,200. It just gives you the relative idea of the magnitude of each of the modes. I'll leave that up just for a second. This provides, I'm going to skip these slides. These provide our methodology for the bicycle forecast. And now I'm going to turn this presentation over to Michael Glickman, and Michael's going to talk a little bit about traffic diversion and the level of service and capacity along Connecticut Avenue. Michael?
Thanks, Ed. So as Ed indicated, daily weekday traffic diversions were modeled for concepts B and C based on the 2045 no build volumes. A portion of the diversion will occur within the secondary study area, and others will be routed to regional facilities beyond the primary and secondary study areas. The daily diversions for concept B and C were then distributed over the 5-hour weekday morning period to account for inbound traffic diversions, and then the 5-hour weekday afternoon period to account for the outbound traffic diversions. Diversions are not expected to occur for the remaining 14 hours of the day. So next slide, please. So what we determined was that 55% to 60% of diversions will occur within the secondary study area, and 40 to 45% will occur along the regional roadways such as Georgia Avenue, Claire Barton Parkway, Canal Road, I-495, MacArthur Boulevard, and George Washington Parkway. As a result, of the 3,160 vehicle trips diverted under concept B, 1,920 will route to the secondary study area, and 1,240 would route to the regional roadways, as I described earlier. Of the 7,020 vehicle trips diverted under concept C, 3,980 would route to the secondary study area, and the remaining 3,130 would route to regional roadways. Next slide, please. So this slide represents diversions graphically using green lines to show decreases in peak hour volumes and blue lines to show increases in peak hour volumes. The lines are weighted based on the relative increase or decrease on a particular roadway. And then the blue and green numbers with the arrows represent the peak hour directional volumes along each of the primary and secondary study area corridors. So if you look at concept C, you can see how the blue line is thicker on certain north-south roads. It's more pronounced in concept B. And again, it's based on the volume based on the volume of that road. So because Reno has a thicker line doesn't mean it has more diversion than Wisconsin Avenue. It just means as a percentage of the existing volume, that's why it's shown that way. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this flow chart is to show how the peak hour diversions were calculated based on the total daily diversions for concept B and C. The white letters represent concept B and the blue letters represent concept C. For example, you can see that the 3,160 ADT for concept B results in an increase of 100 vehicles in the peak direction of the highest peak hour along Wisconsin Avenue. Again, this volume was distributed over 5 hours in the peak direction, the peak period, so diversions would be incrementally less in the hours prior to and following the highest peak hour. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into our level of service analysis. And for those that are not aware of the term level of service, it's a grading system from A to F based on vehicle delay through an intersection. LOS or level of service and delay are reported for the highest peak hour in the morning and the highest peak hour in the evening. An intersection operating with under 55 seconds of delay is considered acceptable and denoted as level of service D or better. An intersection with 55 seconds to 80 seconds of delay would be designated as level of service E and considered to be operating under constrained conditions. Level of service F theoretically applies to anything above 80 seconds, but generally roadway users will adjust their routes to offset any excessive delays. So really the purpose is to show that relative comparison between each of the concept, no build, concept B, and concept C. Next slide. Before I get into the actual results, I just want to kind of go through what you're looking at here on the screen. If you see the arrow with the 3 boxes, the box in the left represents the no build condition. The box in the center represents concept B, and the box on the right, or sorry, concept B, yeah, and the box on the right is concept C. When you see an intersection with just a green box, that means that it's a study area intersection and it meets level service D or better through all conditions. So now we'll look at the AM peak hour within the primary study area, which is the area shown on this graphic. It's the area within the dashed lines along Connecticut Avenue. And what you see in this, the most notable intersection would be Nebraska and Connecticut Avenue that operates under level service F under all conditions analyzed. And then you can also see down at Calvert, that's another one that operates at level service, but that's at level service E for all conditions. And then the other intersections that are shown, they vary depending on between one concept to the other. Some may slightly get better from E to D or slightly worse from D to E. And if you look at the table that's shown there, you can see that each of the concepts all just have one intersection under the AM peak hour within the primary study area that has a level of service F. Next slide, please. We'll now move into the secondary study area, which is the area outside of the dash box. You can see the intersections of Nebraska and Broad Branch, and then Beach Drive and Tilden Street operate with level service F during all conditions analyzed. The intersection of Ward Circle, that's the intersection of Nebraska and Massachusetts. One notable result there is that concept C drops the level of service from E to F under build conditions. Next slide, please. Again, sorry, before you switch, you can again draw your attention to the table, and you can see that concepts, the no build and concept B both have 2 intersections at F, and concept C has 3. Now we'll move on to the PM peak hour of the primary study area. Again, that's the area inside the box. You see Nebraska Avenue and Connecticut again operates at level service F for all conditions. But one note is the intersection of Cathedral in Connecticut actually improves from F to E between concept C and the no build condition. And if you look at the table here, concept C has 1 less intersection with level service F than the no build and concept B. Next slide. So the secondary study area, now again, that's the area outside of the box. The intersections of Reno Road and Military Road, Western Avenue and River Road, Nebraska and Ward Circle all operate at level service F during no build, concept B and concept C. And if you look at that table, you can see that all intersections have the same general results through all conditions analyzed. Next slide, please. Now this slide compares the travel times for no build, concept B and concept C. The intent of this analysis is really to show the relative difference in performance for each of the analyzed alternatives. So for the peak southbound direction, the AM peak hour, and that's shown on the top table, the overall travel time for the corridor increases by 3 minutes for concept B and 7 minutes for concept C as compared to the no build condition. For the peak northbound direction during the PM peak hour, and that's shown in the bottom table, the overall travel time for the corridor increases by 4 minutes for concept B and 8 minutes for concept C as compared to the no build condition. And thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Michael. So just a few next steps. One is we are presenting these findings of our traffic analysis and the other evaluation elements to our stakeholders and our interagency groups this month. We're preparing for a public meeting that we're, as Charlotte said, March 30th and April 1st. We'll hold that public meeting. We'll gather testimony and comments from all of our stakeholders and the public, and then develop a recommendation for moving forward if we have a preferred concept. If we have a preferred concept, then we would do a 10% conceptual design and then go through subsequent environmental documentation. These slides, you have this, everyone has the slide set and it's on your website, your ANC's website, and it has our contact information, the project website, and the project email. We encourage everyone to email the project email address. It gets to Cynthia and I, and we share it with our team. Again, project website and the email address. And thank you. I know this was a tremendous number of slides to try to take in, and so we've done a lot of work, and everyone has different aspects of the study that they're interested in, and you know, we want to hear from you, and I want to sincerely say that DDOT is not pushing any one of these alternatives. As I said, concept B and C rose to the top. We have a no build option, and we really want to hear what the ANC's vision is for the corridor. You know, what do you want to see Connecticut Avenue look like in the next 25 years? Do you want it to stay the same? Do you want to see the reversible lanes removed? Do you want to see a bike lane? What is your vision? And then we'll try to communicate that vision to our senior management and to the public when we have to make some decisions. And let me end there. And David, you want to open it up for questions?
Sure. So I really want to thank you and Michael and Cynthia for the presentation. And like you say, it's a lot of information, and some of us, I know as you showed the slide earlier with the folks that have been on the Citizens Advisory Committee, there's, you know, myself and Bob Dealing, and I think Eileen McCarthy, several of us are on this call tonight and have been with you. And again, tonight's intention was really to have you all, you know, present where you are, kind of what you've been thinking, excuse me, what the alternatives are. And now it's really for us as ANC 3F, and I think all my fellow commissioners are on board tonight, and Bob Dealing's on, is really to listen and to, you know, have take questions. I know there's been a number of questions in the chat that I think Bob Dealing has been tracking. And really now we've got for the, you know, the remainder of the meeting, if it's 30, 45 minutes or whatnot, we can take questions. And I think we'll wrap up in terms of talking about our process with ANC3, what we're going to be going, you know, what we're going to be doing next. Because I think, Ed, as you asked us, you know, what's our vision? I mean, I think we've, you know, 3F put forth a resolution a couple years ago, really wanting this study, you know, wanting alternatives, wanting to make Connecticut Avenue a better street for it. And I think that's consistent with other ANCs up and down the corridor, because this is essentially, this is our main street for much of us. And so how do we make it safer? How do we make it more accessible to more people? How do we open up to more modes of transportation? For example, how do we get bikes and scooters off the sidewalks? And they won't get off the sidewalks until there's a safe space in the street for them to do that. And so I think it's now, I'll stop there. And I think what I'll do is, I don't know, Bob, if you want to take Bob Dealing, some of the questions in the chat, we'll start with those. And then we'll go with some questions any questions from the commissioners that are on board. And then we'll take questions from people that are here. I know there's some people who've raised some hands, and so we'll try to manage this the best we can. And as those of you that have been with us from the beginning, please be patient. Sometimes stuff happens, so we'll see how this goes. But we're glad you're here. So thanks for sticking with us.
So David, I have a list of maybe 7 or 8 people in the chat who seem to have questions. A couple of them are commissioners, but I think you were thinking the commissioners would come later, unless I'm wrong. But we could have commissioners first if you want.
Let's just take them in order if we can.
Okay, all right. Well, then in the order I saw them, and maybe these people have had their questions answered, I'm not sure, but I saw Rebecca Martin early on in the chat had a question. So Rebecca, if you're here, please go ahead.
Oh, I had all sorts of questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's start with one.
Yes.
Please.
So I guess I'm a little confused about what you said about the overhead signage that is allowed. It's not allowed. You said that the Commission on Fine Arts was against it. Could you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. Our team met with both the Commission on Fine Arts and the State Historic Preservation Office. And both entities indicated that, they would not be in favor of having overhead signage in the corridor. And if you can picture what the overhead signage looks like, if you know what it looks like on Colesville Road in Silver Spring, that's the kind of overhead signals and signage that would be required by our traffic manual, the manual on, as Cynthia said, the manual on uniform traffic control devices to put up at a number of places on the corridor. And so the concern is the historic nature of the avenue, Connecticut Avenue, and also the aesthetics of the avenue. And we will be going, if we decide to pursue one of the options, we would be going into the Section 106 environmental process, where we would have a consultation with all of the consulting parties, the agencies, and again, we would have your public testimony and comments that we would provide to them as well. But aesthetics and visibility are concerns of both the State Historic Preservation Office as well as CFA.
Thanks, Ed. So Bob, what's next?
Yes, I think Kathy Hudson might have been next on the list.
I think I've been yammering on in the comment box all along. I am so grateful that you guys have done this. I mostly am interested in, when is the ANC going to provide its formal input back, and how are you going to come up with your sort of recommendations or input to provide back? This is a nice setting, but it's a really select group of people who have time to participate in an ANC meeting.
Right. So I think I'll take a stab at that. And then if any of my commissioners want to chime in. So this is, we've been working on this for a while, and so we've been working on this for a while. And so we have opinions, and I think kind of answering your question directly, it's our intent, the 7 of us, to get together and to, at some point in the near future, to put together a recommendation, and that usually is in the form of resolution supporting a certain position that's, that we've seen tonight. And so I think part of this, process like tonight is for us to sort of hear from you all. I think there's going to be, as Ed Stoloff said, there's going to be a larger community meeting at the end of March. And so that these 2 meetings, plus hopefully you all know how to get in touch with us and you can encourage your neighbors to get in touch with us. And so we'll be getting feedback from, people in the community who may not have made it tonight. And at some point, probably practically, I'll just stick my neck out and say sometime in April, we'll be looking to put together a resolution that we hope will be part of the public process. I know the other ANCs are doing that, the other groups are doing that, but that's a kind of a rough time frame. And
Thank you.
fellow commissioners want to jump in and offer their perspectives.
If not, I think we can move on to the next questioner then. Julia Stevenson, I believe, was next on my list. If Julia still has a question. If not, well, let's see. If Julia comes back, great. But if not, the next person on the list I had was James Harnett, I believe. James, if you're here.
Yes, hi. I just had a quick question about buses. I was interested to see what sort of analysis the DDOT team has done around looking at whether any of the remaining travel lanes under any of these concepts should be used for dedicated bus lanes like we see on H&I Street in downtown, or that are coming in a lot of the bus priority areas that have been identified.
Thank you, James. I'll take a stab at that. Our team has met with WMATA, and we have met with our own transit delivery division. And there's a sense that there's other priority corridors in the district where they would like to see dedicated lanes. It's they're looking at the ridership, and they're also looking at the metro, both the metro ridership and the metro stations, the line that we have. And so one of the concerns was duplication of service. We did look at a brainstorming option with bus and bike lanes, dedicated lanes. But again, the agencies that we met with did not feel that the avenue was a priority for dedicated lanes, given that we can't serve all of the uses that we really would like to. And if we had to prioritize a mode, which one would we prioritize? And so they're saying there are other corridors in the district where they see bus priority as an emphasis.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Ed. Oh, David, I have as our next person on the list, Kathy Sykes, if she is on.
I don't have any specific questions. I think it was very, many of the things I had questions about have been answered in the presentation. So I just thank you guys for a very good job.
But Kathy, I'm going to give a shout out to you. So I don't know if anybody, if people out in our audience tonight know who Kathy Sykes is, but if you like the flowers on Connecticut Avenue or up on Van Ness, particularly Upper Side, Kathy is the person to thank. So somebody who's really making Connecticut Avenue really a better place to live. And Kathy, I love the flowers that you've been planting, and hopefully you'll get more volunteers to help you out, and hopefully you'll make it all the way down to Cleveland Park someday.
Well, love to do that. And I know we'll have another opportunity to plant in the spring. So stay tuned with Van Ness Main Street. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Next on my list, I believe, is Bob Ward.
Hi, thanks. I was hoping that maybe Ed, you guys could characterize, I guess the one thing I took away from the traffic data was that the diversions weren't as big as I thought they might be, and how you would characterize those diversions. I mean, just looking at some of the numbers on the cars, like Reno Road is going to get 50 more cars at peak hour from both B and C. I mean, that's like one car per light cycle. Am I looking at that correctly? And I guess the other point is on the addition of bikes. It looks like it's like a tenfold increase to what is it, something like 3,200 bikes expected on a daily basis down Connecticut Avenue in the long term. I mean, that's almost as many people who are taking the bus now. So anyhow, I just appreciate your comments on that.
Sure. I'll start with the diversion, and Michael might want to finish with the diversions. The diversion, as you can see there, the network is really huge. And I think if you can envision the regional, people will divert to the regional network, and they'll divert to within the study areas to the 4 principal parallel routes, Mass Avenue, Reno, Beach, and Broad Branch in Wisconsin. So those are the primary routes. And really the model looks at a function of I don't want to get too technical, but if something is overflowing, for example, the model's not going to send a vehicle to that road that overflows. So there's less diversion, there's less percentage, for example, put on Reno Road in Alt B, but there's, I would say, more diversion because there's less cars on it. And then in concept C, there's less of a percentage because more cars are put on Wisconsin and Mass. I don't know if that makes sense. Michael, do you want to take off
I guess
on that?
I was looking for a simpler answer. Would you consider the diversion to be manageable?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the numbers are small. They're spread out, as Michael said, over 10 hours a day. And it's spread out, so 3,000 might sound like a lot, or 7,000 may sound like it's a lot as well, but it's spread out over 10 hours a day on all the roads in the network. And that's why we're using the word manageable. Does that help a little?
Yep. Thank you.
Great.
Sorry for the complex answer.
Thanks, Ed. This is Bob again. So I am keeping track of the list. Hopefully I'm on track here. I think the next person on my list is Max Smith.
I think James mainly asked the primary question I had, which was about the bus lanes, and I'm not quite sure I understood the answer, given that if you're already doing this project, you're not taking bus priority work away from other places. So I'm not quite sure I followed that answer, but I think given that you guys have already kind of taken that piece of it, I did want to ask a little more about the sidewalks, because I understand not wanting to go into the sidewalks because of the issue that could create with going into the curb, but it seems like there are lots of areas, including in 3F between, say, Albemarle and up to even all the way up to Nebraska, where sidewalks are kind of narrow on Connecticut. So I'm wondering why there are areas where maybe you could go with widening the sidewalk there as opposed to a couple of extra parking spaces, or if that's something that is in the thought process or not. I put a little more in the chat, but that was really my remaining question.
Sure. As part of the guiding principle of the project, widening sidewalks, we're not doing streetscape work. There are other projects that are ongoing in DDOT. We're just starting a Van Ness commercial study where we are specifically looking at the streetscape. And so, but this project itself is just looking within the 60-foot curb to curb width.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So next is, I believe, our commissioner, Commissioner Mehta.
Yes, thank you. Thanks everybody for this presentation. It looks like a ton of work has gone into it, and we appreciate that. I have 2 questions. The first one is that I was unfortunately unable to attend. I think there was a meeting last week with some of the business stakeholders along the Connecticut Avenue corridor, and I'm wondering if somebody from DDOT who's here tonight could characterize or summarize, I suppose, some of the feedback and comments from the business stakeholders.
Sure. We're still waiting for some formal comments from the stakeholders, but they're concerned. They're concerned about their business viability, and the belief is that the patrons predominantly take the auto mode to their establishments. We did set up a parking survey, a link We didn't get a whole lot of response from the businesses. I think we have about 36 responses, but we have some, with the responses that we have, I think it's a good summary of what we would probably get from, if we had 100 businesses taking the survey. And that, I think the theme is that they're really worried. They're worried that the pandemic has affected their businesses, and that they see parking as vital to the continuation of their businesses. I think in a nutshell, that's what we heard.
Thank you for that. I guess not terribly surprising. The second question I have has to do with the discussion around the diversion of traffic if capacity on Connecticut Avenue is effectively reduced by virtue of one or some of these options. Has there been any thought to how that diversion actually takes place? In other words, which side streets are affected? For example, if there's too much traffic on Connecticut Avenue, somebody wants to divert over to Reno Road, that has impacts on the streets that are running between Reno and Connecticut, or Connecticut and Wisconsin. And
Sure.
I know that some people are worried about the increase in traffic along some of those side roads, those connectors, I'll call them.
Sure. I'm going to let Michael take a stab at that. And I'm also going to put the map back up with the diversion so you can kind of see the green and blue lines, the decreases and increases. Michael?
Sure. So if you if you look at the well, you can, a lot of the diversions are captured on some of the side streets. Generally, because this is a diversion for through traffic, really traffic that's heading from the north end of the corridor to the south end, it gets captured prior to the study area, the majority of it. But you can see that there, for instance, if you look at Albemarle, there's a blue line there, and you can see the number shown there. It's like 15 vehicles. So there are these minor diversions along the side streets, and most of them are in that range, because again, this is now just to be clear, the model doesn't account for if there's a crash on Connecticut Avenue and there's one lane, where that traffic diverts just as it would today if something happened. This is capturing that sort of traffic entering the network. So. But generally, in terms of the output of the model, the side streets diversions are minimal, I would say.
And I think I would add that when we get into further design, and if we were ever to implement something like this, we would look at neighborhood by neighborhood, and perhaps have signage, no through traffic, and really trying to make sure that the circulation in the neighborhood is not impacted in a great way by any traffic that might divert. And so we would look at neighborhood by neighborhood and try to come up with a mitigation plan to make sure that the diversion doesn't occur to a great extent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Next on my list, from the chat anyway, is Maura.
Hey, thank you for doing this. I had one question. In some of the slides, it seemed like there was one that said that bicycle traffic would increase 10 times over the current count of cyclists. But then in other slides, it seems like it's considering that even in concept C, the number of cars would kind of stay the same. So I was just wondering if you could talk about if the model accounts for people shifting their behavior from, when there's a protected bike lane installed, because at least I think anecdotally, my guess is a lot of people would switch modes once they saw that bike lane. Thanks.
Yeah. Let me try to answer that. And I think the answer is no. I think what I talked about in terms of the limitations of the model, the models, at least that we have here, does not do a good job of people, looking at people shifting modes. And we know that would happen. We know that's happened throughout the country when other projects has occurred. But this is really, unfortunately, this is a traffic model, and we do the best we can. We have to ground truth. We have to ground truth the numbers that come out of the model with what we believe might happen. And I think you're exactly correct. That people would additional folks would switch to bicycles, they would switch to metro, they may switch to transit, and they'll have other modal opportunities. But the model itself does not capture, at least the one that we have, and we use the model from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, does not capture this. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. I think the next question is from Stan Wall.
Yes, thank you to DDOT for this presentation. Following up on Commissioner Maida's question around the business impacts, are you able to provide a more detailed view of the corridor that shows exactly where parking is being retained versus where it's being eliminated? Like, where are those 110 plus spaces?
Yeah, we actually have some parking graphics that we showed the Main Street organizations last week. We didn't include those in this presentation, so we have some conceptual graphics. But I think what you're talking about is, where exactly, and I think if we go with one concept or another, concept B doesn't take any parking. If we go with a concept C type of alternative, we would go into what we call the 10% design. And basically we would look intersection by intersection, road link by road link, road section by section, and basically work with the property owners to see the extent of parking we can provide. I think what Cynthia said is if we have a turn lane, there will be trade-offs. If we happen to put a turn lane in, then there's going to be less parking in the corridor. So it's not it's not all or nothing, but there are trade-offs. So we would look at everything. We look at everything on a block by block basis. And I think, as Cynthia said, that parking, the all-day parking, could be either on the east side or the west side. And we would work when we would go into further design to see and work with the property owners and the businesses to see which side of the street would work best.
A quick follow-up as it relates to diversion and mitigation approaches. In addition to signage, I would just ask that DDOT also look at real enforcement, because just looking at the example of the Slow Streets program, there's barricades, but I don't think I've seen myself any case of actual enforcement of a vehicle using a slow street as a through street that's been pulled over or ticketed. So I'd want to see some real enforcement if there is going to be mitigation put in for diversion.
Sure. Thank you. And I have a note of that. And also, just to let you know, with an enforcement, if we are successful in reducing the speed limit, the posted speed limit on Connecticut Avenue, we would also recommend that we talk with our automated enforcement folks and have some cameras put out. And I don't know if that's possible, but we've started talking with our folks to see if that would be possible. So it would be a combination of speed, automated speed enforcement, and a posted speed limit reduction. So just, I know that wasn't your question. I just wanted to add that.
No, and I see there's a commenter who asked about that on Connecticut Avenue itself. So I also agree with that same comment. But not only on the diversion, but also on Connecticut itself. If it's dropped to 25, then enforce that.
Sure. Have a note of that.
Thank you, Ed, and Commissioner Wall. If you're finished, I'll move on to the next one. I believe Ryan Keefe is the next on my list, and I apologize if somebody had a question that didn't quite get picked up. So please let us know again in the chat if we're missing your question. Ryan Keefe.
Yeah, just one quick question. Has DDOT thought about transit priority signaling at all at a couple of the real problem intersections, particularly Nebraska and Connecticut, Military, Albemarle and Porter, etc. It would be great to have some sort of priority signaling for L2 services in particular, so that they can get through the lights without needing to take a pretty long pause. I guess, and the second part of that is, are you looking at moving the stops to the far side in this scenario as well?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. To answer your question, I just made a note of the transit priority signaling. That's something I would like to talk to our traffic operation staff with, and so that's a good suggestion, and we'll get back to you on that. Your second question was, Ryan, your second question?
Yeah, my second question was, are we going to talk about moving bus stops in particular to far side in under scenarios, particularly under option C with the bike lanes? I think it's good for the riders in general, but particularly with the bus bike conflict and what we've seen on 14th Street. It's particularly important to put those stops on the far side where possible, so you do not have an obstructed view for cars taking right turns when it comes to cyclists.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. We have looked at that. I think our consultants came up with a list of maybe 17 possible far side stops. We think that's going to be reduced. We haven't shared that with anyone yet, but we think that's going to be reduced. I think there's some electrical issues at some of the stops and driveways that we have to look at further, and we'll be going out into the field, but we will be recommending far side bus stops along the corridor. And I think there were 4 potential stops that we were looking at for possible elimination. And so we will work with LaMotta on our recommendations, and we'll be able to share those bus stop relocations with you during the public meeting that we have in March.
So thanks, Ed. I don't know, Bob, I think you said that was the last question.
Almost, I believe Ezra had a question, and I think that's the end of my list unless someone else wants to let me know I've missed them.
This is Commissioner Appa. I think there are 2 folks, Paul and Gordon, who have their hands up. I don't know if they were up from earlier or not, but I don't know if
could have been. I don't see hands because maybe David does. So sorry about that. But Ezra was on my list from the chat. So
yeah, let's do Ezra from the chat, and then if there's raised hands, I think we'll have to get out of the shared screen because I don't see any hands except my hands.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Ezra. I am not in Ward 3, but my parents live in Ward 3. I'm in 3F, just by the Van Ness Metro. So I bike on Connecticut Avenue quite a lot to go see them and to go home. And I usually take a longer route that puts me on Connecticut longer in order to avoid the extremely steep hills on Tilden and Porter. So I think that's just something to be aware of. That's something that's especially newer cyclists who aren't able to bike up those hills end up on Connecticut longer. So a safer way for them to bike would be better. So I want to thank the DDOT team for having this meeting and similar meetings 3 nights in a row. I appreciate that work, and I appreciate that you're looking into ways to improve Connecticut Avenue. And Ed, I think at the end of your presentation, you asked us about how we envision Connecticut Avenue over the next 25 years. And I think that's a sort of inspired me to think about, how often it is that we have the chance to improve and rethink our streets like this. And I guess my question is, if we don't take this opportunity to make Connecticut Avenue safer and to put in protected bike lanes, how long do you think it will be before the chance comes again?
I can't answer that question. I know the easy route would be to just modify the reversible lanes. Concept B, no parking taken. We change we eliminate the reversible lane system. Bang. It's probably inexpensive. It could be done quickly. And concept C, as everyone knows, is a bit more complicated. It has parking issues and a number of other issues that we would have to deal with. And so, I'm trying to get the pulse of the community. Do you want things to change minimally? Do you want things to change in a more comprehensive and manner with different modes? And again, there's an easy solution, and then there's a more difficult solution. And I'm asking you, the ANCs and all of the folks in Connecticut Avenue to give us your ideas as to what you want to see.
Right, and I will jump in there. I think the time is now. Again, I kind of mentioned in the introduction that ANC 3F put together a resolution back in 2018 that wanted to study. And from my interpretation as a relatively new commissioner and the conversations I've had with my fellow commissioners and also with the Streets and Sidewalk Committee and people in the community, the time is now. And so, again, I think we're gonna, we'll continue to have questions, but I think it's our intention really, now is to implement this vision, and we're trying to figure out what that is. I think we've got some, there's a number of alternatives, and I think, again, but I think now the time is now to do that. So I think, Ed, you said you had one more question in the chat. I've got two. I saw the two hands raised, so we can go to those if there's nothing else in the chat.
Yeah, David, I just saw the two hand raised questions. I believe this is Paul and Gordon. So why don't we go with Gordon first?
Okay.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for holding meetings on repeat nights, as was mentioned previously. I know that it takes a lot of work to get prepared for these. I have a project-related question which you can answer, and then the bigger question. So the first question relates to how the bike facilities would, in concept C, would end on either side. I don't think that you would envision the protected bike lane just ending and then the traffic configuration is the same and we're just dumping people onto, Connecticut at the intersection with Calvert without any other connections. And then the bigger picture question is this. So I live in Ward 5 and near a bunch of dangerous avenues like Rhode Island and New York and Michigan. And this process has taken a long time. How are we going to get to a point where the city can execute multiple simultaneous reimaginings of our avenues like this so that they are safe for all users?
That's a hard question, Gordon. I would say we're starting with our active transportation branch in DDOT. They have started reimagining a number of and many streets within the district already, I think, as you know, trying to make the streets multimodal. I think we have a goal in Move DC right now to put at least 25 lanes, 25 miles of dedicated bus lanes in the city in the next 5 years. And we have a goal for our bicycle facilities as well. So we're started. We've gotten some mandates from the council to increase multimodal activity on a number of streets. And I think this project is different than a lot of the projects because it's a 3-mile corridor. A lot of the other segments are, as you know, are shorter. So we have many different conditions within this 3-mile corridor. One of our principles is whatever we do, we would like to keep the corridor consistent. So to have consistency of driver expectations, consistency of bicycle expectations, consistency for transit drivers. So I think that's one of the principles that we are trying to uphold. I think we got questions early on in the study. Could we make, a bicycle facility here and maybe nothing here and then another bicycle facility, a few blocks later? And I think our goal is to try to, whatever we do, to try to come up with a consistency of capacity and a consistency of modes within this corridor. I think that may not get to your full question, but I think this is the first project where we're looking at a 3-mile segment for a multimodal activity.
And then just on how the bike facilities would end, Or is that for your design later?
That would be designed when we get to our conceptual design, 10% design. And if there is a preferred alternative, we would go to a 30% and beyond design. I would say one thing about concept C, and that is we were asked, the scope of the study is to only look at the area from Legation Street to Calvert Street. And we have been asked by some folks that if a bicycle facility, a protected facility is ultimately selected, that we actually look at conditions beyond Legation to the north, perhaps Northampton Street, perhaps by the Circle, Chevy Chase Circle. And I think we would look at that. We would look at the impacts to the businesses. We would look at impacts to the adjacent parking and traffic. We would look at the whole realm of impacts if we decide to go with an alternative that has bike lanes. If not, we won't extend that study area.
Thanks, Ed. And I think we have Paul as our possibly last on the list here.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to DDOT and your consultants. This is very exciting as someone who's lived along Connecticut Avenue for the past 20 years to be talking about bike lanes protected on Connecticut Avenue is just really exciting, I think, for many generations to come. My question is regarding C, which I very much favor option C. I noticed that there's a lot of hatching of the protected bike lanes. So my question is the protected bike lane protected in terms of by having parking separating the bicyclist from the moving motor vehicles, or maybe some other type of concrete curbing, again, for that protection? Or is it more of a buffered bike lane with paint?
I'm going to let Michael answer that question while I go to that slide.
Sure. And
Michael.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So yeah, so there'll be some of this has to be determined as we get into our concept design, but generally the preference right now seems to be kind of the wheel stops, the curbed area within the buffer, and the purpose of that is to prevent people from vehicles parking in there, and it also redirects vehicles if something should happen. But we really don't want Ubers to be pulling off into bike lanes and things like that. So that's the intent when we have a full width buffer. We have to there will be something within the buffer area through the parking segment. So you see as that box to the right, you can see how in the parking where there's parking, the bike lanes behind the parking, and then there's a narrower buffer. So it is the 1.5 feet is wide enough to include a treatment. We could use ballards. There may be other options, and that's something we're going to work through with the active transportation group within DDOT. Again, we have not worked out all those details yet, but the intent is to protect the bike lanes.
Yeah.
Great. And if I can ask one more. Oh, sorry, Ed, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Cynthia used the word skinnied, and we just want to, there is a trade-off here. And the trade-off is that these buffers are not as wide as we would normally want them to be. So again, if we're going to provide parking, then there's a trade-off with the width of the buffer. Michael or Paul?
If I could just ask a follow-up. Is it possible to combine the two bike lanes onto one side of the road so that the buffer would go from the skinny 1.5 feet to maybe a fatter 3 feet?
Can you, are you talking about one of our alternatives, like alternative D, that has two-way bike lanes on the west side of the street, something like that?
Yeah, I guess something like that. I know D2 in particular had an issue with only one travel lane northbound during non-peak periods. So maybe there would be a solution of, having more safety, more protection for, 4-year-old to 80-year-old, 90-year-old cyclists in the bike lane.
I can tell you that our traffic engineering and signals division is pretty much against one lane in this off-peak period. It's not just traffic capacity, but it's emergency vehicle access. It's trucks that might have to make deliveries. It's a lot of things. And so it's just not the numbers. It's the, it's the what if something happens and we're down to, cars backing up where one lane is blocked. So I think that's one of the major flaws of concept B2.
And just to follow up on that, if you were to show, I think it's D1 would be the option that it's the one right before it. That also has the next one. There you go. So this one is one that we had two-way. We showed a two-way cycle track with the option for either parking or the left turn. But the issue for this is that for a two-way cycle track, the requirement is that a left turn pocket has to be provided at every intersection. Whereas on a one-way, it's only intersections that have volumes greater than 50 vehicles. So it really puts us in a box trying to make that work. So in other words, this would require, essentially what this means is the option shown on the right would be the default versus the one shown on the left. So it just makes parking, retaining any parking problematic.
Thank you.
So David, I think
I think there's two questions in the chat.
Yeah.
One I saw from, I think it was Josh Rising in terms of I thought it might have been answered, but let's give Josh a shot. And there was one other question that was further up. Essentially, it was about let's say if, the question directly was, if C is the choice, what's the timing on that in terms of being implemented from once the decision is made to when it's, when we could bike in protected bike lanes. So Josh, you're up first.
Great. Yes. No. And thanks again to DDOT for all this. My question was if the, so let's say option C were selected, but then that stops at Legation, the bike lane, and you said you would need to kind of, then assess going forward. I was just wondering, is that kind of require another study, or is that something that can be done more expeditiously than the current timeline we're on, which is a multi-year sort of timeline? And then that'll segue nicely into the timing question that's out there too.
Yeah, I think that once we assess everyone's comments and testimony after the March-April meeting, if we decide to go forward, we would include those additional studies in our 10% conceptual design. So we would go forth with some of the additional parking analysis and traffic analysis to the extent that we would potentially extend it up to or near the Chevy Chase Circle. As far as funding, this project is not funded for construction or final design. If we have a recommendation to go forward, I would need to make a pitch to our senior management within DDOT to put something in our capital budget for the project, and so I would say that we wouldn't final design on something like this might be 12 to 18 months, and funding might take 6 to 12 months. So you're really talking, I would say, at least 3 years before you would see something, at least 3 years before we see something on the ground. And I think, again, we would, if we have a consensus, to the extent that we have a consensus from the community, that would help us on any alternative, be it B or C or anything else, that would help us prioritize the project.
So I think there's, I don't know if Tom Vo, if you're there, if that answers your question, or you want to try to give it another try.
Hi, I'm actually just want to follow up on that note. I was just wondering if there and a short-term solutions that we can look into. So it's just like, because right now, like I just saw in the chat box and throughout the conversations, there are a lot of cyclists and I am a cyclist too, and I live on Connecticut Avenue for the past 2 years. What I've been seeing just during the rush hour is just a lot of cars which is speeding up and down the street. And as I was saying that too, that right now it was just too dangerous for cyclists to safely bike or commute up and down Connecticut, especially during the rush hour. So we just and you were just and Ed, you were just told us about the concept C going to take at least 3 years. And I'm assuming that without the hiccup and without the bureaucracy within the local government. But I would just wonder if there are any like short-term solutions that we can implement, let's just say within this year, to create a safer space for cyclists to commute on Connecticut Avenue.
Yeah, we were asked that question, I think, a couple times during the past year, and someone said, well, couldn't you do a pilot type of activity on Connecticut Avenue? And I think the way we responded is that the complexity of the issues and would be, it would take a lot of work and almost the same amount of work to do in terms of design to do a short-term project than actually design it in the traditional way. So I think we did look at could you just do a pilot? And I think the answer is we'd have to go through the same kind of design, the same kind of efforts with funding as well. So we opted against that. Again, we will look at all possibilities if an option is selected with a protected bicycle lane. And again, we don't have that determination yet.
All right, thanks, Ed. I think that's it for the chat. I'm going to ask my fellow commissioners that are still on, if you have any questions, give you a chance. I know we had heard from Commissioner Mehta and Commissioner Wall. If the rest of you would like to chime in or ask a question, now's the time. And then after that, we'll see if there's any energy left for the rest of you. And then we will call it a night and talk about and kind of repeat some of the next steps.
So Commissioner Appa, I don't have any questions. Most of my questions are answered, but if there are folks who have questions later, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to forward them on, or you can of course send them directly, but happy to take on questions after if there are some, and try to get a response back to you.
Any other commissioners want to chime in or have a question?
I just want to, this is Commissioner Buechner. I just want to reiterate Commissioner Appa's request to the community to let me know if you have any questions or any feedback. I'm so happy that some of my constituents who I was going to ask questions on behalf of were here today to ask questions themselves. I'm so excited to see you here. And thank you so much to DDOT for your continued efforts on this project.
And I just want to extend another thanks to DDOT for this thoughtful effort. And I do want there to be given very strong consideration to some of the points being raised in the chat about interim measures. So, we can drop the speed limit now. Like, I don't understand why that needs to be delayed for 3 years of going from 30 to 25. Similarly, the lane reversal is, paused right now. Why can't we leave it that way? Like, I don't understand the need to wait 3 years for some of those interim measures.
As well as enforcement mechanisms that you were talking about earlier, Commissioner Wall.
Yeah. Let me respond and I'll say yes. If it's determined that the speed can be reduced, that element would not have to wait 3 years. If it's determined that There's safety and mobility improvements. I think we talked about some left turn improvements and curb extensions, and again, those may not have to wait, 3 years either. So some of the small things definitely could be done in a very timely manner. It's just that if we had a wholesale change in the operation of the avenue, that would take design work.
But I think that's a good.
The other, and this is my last point, the other request I would have is just when you're presenting this kind of data in the future, if you can reverse the priority of impacts. So right now you start with cars and work your way down to pedestrians. If you can flip that around and have pedestrians at the top of your chart, then work your way down to cars. It's a small measure, but it shows a rethinking in terms of where the priorities lie in terms of impacts to people versus cars.
Thank you.
So I think thanks for my fellow commissioners. And I think that's right. I think the statement's made, but now is the time. It's in the public realm, and give us feedback. It's also Mary Che, Councilwoman Member Che is the chair of the Transportation Environment Committee. So she's somebody that we all will be talking with. So I guess, is there any other questions from anybody else who's still with us? This is the time to get your question out if it hasn't been answered. And if not, we'll kind of restate some of the next steps and then kind of what we're going to do or what we're going to plan to do, and then we'll call it a night. Any last questions? I guess I see that. Thank you. Nope. So Ed, you're gonna have a come on meeting I think you've got a tentative date of March 30th or April what? And when will we know when that date's gonna be?
First, we will be getting, Charlotte may want to, I'll talk a little bit about that, but we'll be getting rack cards out and an email blast out. Charlotte, would you like to follow up on that?
Sure, Ed, thank you. As Ed mentioned, we will be having 2 public meetings. One will be on March the 30th. And one will be on April the 1st. The March the 30th meeting, as I mentioned earlier, will be during the daytime. We want to make sure business owners and other people who can come out during the morning are able to attend that. And then we will have an evening meeting. We will be passing out rack cards too. So Chair Christelle will be reaching out to you all as well to identify, other drop-off locations. And any impediments that you all may see to people attending. Of course, the meeting will be virtual, but if there are ways that we need to reach out to people who may not, want to be involved virtually, like dropping off material or things like that, we would love to hear from you all as well. There will be a call-in number, for people to attend. But if there's material and things that we can drop off to people who may call in but cannot virtually see it, please reach out to us. We would love to get, your feedback on that. So we make sure we get participation at all levels. So that's what I will say. I also put the project email into the chat along with our project website. And as Ed mentioned earlier, we do have a business survey link that talks about, parking and loading along the corridor. We're really asking the businesses to respond to that. And we also have had meetings with property managers too, along the corridor. So if you have businesses or other people who have not seen that link, please refer them to that as well. And I also included that in the chat. So thank you all, and we look forward to having you all also be a part of the 2 public meetings coming up.
So thank you for that, Charlotte and Ed, and thank you for community for showing up. Again, now it's with us, and so continue to let us know what you think. And as we mentioned earlier in the meeting, we will be, ANC 3F will be putting together a resolution, with help from you, with help from the Streets and Sidewalks Committee. And again, just kind of we've got a couple of times that might make sense. Practically either our March meeting, it might be a little bit soon, but certainly in our April meeting, we'll be putting together a resolution that reflects kind of what we've heard, what our visions, what our views are of Connecticut Avenue and how we can make it a better place. And again, because I think as somebody asked before, if we don't do it now, when's it going to happen? And so the time is now. And so let's come together and see what we can do and work with our our stakeholders, our other ANCs, other community groups, with DDOT staff and our council member, and let's see if we can make something really good happen tonight, or not tonight, but in the future. So thanks for joining us tonight. I don't have anything else.
And I want to thank everyone here. It's been a pleasure to talk to everyone tonight and provide the information on the project. And again, please email us with your further questions, and we'll be glad to get back to you. So thank you again for your time.
No, thanks, Ed. Thanks, Ed and team. And our information will be on our website. And this is still recording. It's being recorded in the cloud. So those that know me will need a little bit of help to figure out, how we can get, we'll get the access out. And
I'll take care of it, David. Don't worry.
Thanks, Commissioner Nemeth. So I think with that, I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you again for spending part of your evening with us, and we hope it helped. And until the next time, see you.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Take care.
Night.
See you all later.
Good night. Thank you.
Anybody
Thanks, Matt.
still?
Thanks, Bob. Tom,
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So is this the time where we go out for drinks now?
Yeah, all right.
This is the post-meeting network.
I know, we can't do that. We're
In the
so
before times,
good.
as they say. Yes.
At some point in the future.
In the future. I hope you had a good bike ride at least today.
I did. It was fun.
Good. Thank you all.
Have a good night.
See you
See you,
later.
Matt. See you, Tom. See you, Ben.